Montana Territory, 1875. The last light of day painted the distant mountains in hues of gold and amber as dust swirled around Mason Irwin's boots. He stood on the porch of his modest ranch house, watching the horizon with eyes that had aged well beyond his 26 years. The setting sun cast long shadows across the weathered boards beneath his feet, much like the shadows that had fallen across his life 2 years prior when typhoid had taken his beloved wife Sarah. Pa, Ellie won't share the blocks. Mason closed his eyes briefly, gathering his patience before turning to enter the house. Inside, his 5-year-old twins, Emma and Elijah, were engaged in what had become their nightly battle over the small set of wooden blocks he had carved for them during the long, lonely winter nights. "Elijah, your sister had them first," he said, his voice gentle but firm as he crouched down beside his son. The boy's dark hair and blue eyes were so like his own, while Emma had inherited her mother's honey-blonde curls. Both children bore the same stubborn determination that had kept them alive when the fever had nearly claimed them along with their mother. "But I want to build a fort, Pa," Elijah protested, his small face screwed up in frustration. Mason ruffled his son's hair. "And you can, after supper. Emma, you finish up with those blocks while I get our meal on the table, and then it'll be your brother's turn." Emma nodded solemnly, her blue eyes serious as she carefully stacked another block on her tower. At 5 years old, she already carried herself with a dignity that reminded Mason painfully of Sarah. As Mason moved to the stove where a simple stew bubbled, he caught sight of his reflection in the window. A young man with sun-darkened skin and eyes that had seen too much stared back at him. His dark hair needed cutting, and the stubble on his jaw spoke of days spent focused on work rather than appearance. "Someone will come along eventually." "I hope it's a lady," Emma whispered. "I miss having a lady around." Mason's throat tightened. "Time for sleep now, we've got work to do tomorrow." After the children drifted off, Mason settled into the chair by the fire, account books spread before him. The numbers refused to add up to anything but trouble. The ranch was barely breaking even, and with the twins growing fast, expenses only increased. Without help for the upcoming season, he might have to sell off part of the herd just to make ends meet. As the fire burned low, Mason stared into the embers. Out here, a man learned quickly that sentiment was a luxury. The frontier demanded pragmatism, demanded that survival take precedence over happiness. Mason had built walls around his heart, convinced that focusing solely on providing for his children was the only way forward. Love was a distraction he could not afford, a weakness that had already cost him dearly. Tomorrow would bring more of the same, hard work from dawn until dusk, caring for the twins and the constant struggle to keep the ranch afloat. Mason closed the ledger with a sigh. The frontier was no place for second chances at love. It was a place for survival, nothing more. The spring sun had barely crested the eastern ridge when the sound of hoofbeats drew Mason from the barn where he'd been mending tack. Shielding his eyes, he made out a single rider approaching along the rutted trail that led to his property. The figure was too small for a ranch hand, and a flicker of disappointment passed through him before he noticed the rider was a woman. As she drew closer, Mason could see she rode with the ease of someone who had spent years in the saddle. Her dark green riding dress was practical rather than fashionable, though it hugged her slender frame in a way that caught his attention despite himself. A wide-brimmed hat shaded her face, but when she pulled her horse to a stop and looked up, Mason found himself staring into the most striking green eyes he had ever seen. "Mr. Irwin," she called, her voice clear and confident. Mason approached, wiping his hands on a rag. "That's me." She dismounted with graceful ease, leading her horse forward. "Olivia Marshall, I've come about your advertisement for help on the ranch." Mason blinked, taking in the young woman before him. Now that she stood closer, he could see she was perhaps 22 or 23, with a fresh-faced beauty that seemed at odds with the determination in her posture. Her chestnut hair was pulled back in a practical braid that hung over one shoulder, with wisps escaping to frame an oval face with high cheekbones and full lips. "You're here about the ranch hand position?" Mason couldn't keep the disbelief from his voice. Olivia's chin lifted slightly. I have experience with cattle. I grew up on a ranch outside of Bozeman." Mason crossed his arms. "This isn't ladies' work, Miss Marshall." "And yet here I am, Mr. Irwin, ready to work." Her green eyes flashed with determination. unless you've already filled the position. The twins chose that moment to burst from the house, curiosity drawing them to the visitor. They skidded to a halt beside their father, staring up at the unfamiliar woman with wide eyes. "Who are you?" Elijah asked boldly. Before Mason could reprimand his son's directness, Olivia crouched down to the children's level, her expression softening. "I'm Olivia Marshall, and who might you two be?" "I'm Emma," his daughter said, suddenly shy. "This is my brother Elijah, we're twins." "Twins?" Olivia smiled warmly. "Well, that's special indeed. I'm pleased to meet you both." Mason watched the interaction with a mixture of wariness and reluctant appreciation. The children rarely encountered new people, especially not women, and they were clearly fascinated by the visitor. "Children, go back to the house and finish your breakfast," Mason said, his tone gentle but firm. With obvious reluctance, the twins retreated, turning back several times to look at Olivia before disappearing inside. "They're wonderful children," Olivia said, straightening up. "Yes, they are," Mason's voice was clipped. "Miss Marshall, I appreciate you riding all this way, but I need someone who can handle the physical demands of ranch work, roping, branding, mending fences." "And you presume I cannot?" "It's not proper work for a young woman." Olivia's eyes narrowed slightly. "Mr. Irwin, I've been breaking horses since I was 12. I can rope a calf as quickly as any man, and I've helped with every cattle drive on my father's ranch since I was 16. She gestured to the corral where a half-broken fence sagged. "I can mend that fence for you right now, if you'd like a demonstration." Mason studied her, noting the calluses on her hands and the confidence in her stance. Still, his instinct was to refuse. A woman on his ranch would complicate things, especially one as attractive as Olivia Marshall. "Why aren't you working on your father's ranch?" he asked abruptly. A flash of pain crossed her features before she composed herself. "My father passed last year. The ranch went to my brother, who has different ideas about my future." Understanding dawned. "He wants to marry you off." "To a man twice my age with a mercantile in Helena," she confirmed, her tone matter-of-fact. "I have other plans." Mason sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. He was desperate for help, and if even half of what she claimed about her skills was true, she would be an asset. But the thought of having a young, unmarried woman living on his property stirred up complications he didn't need. "You're only here for my twins," he said suddenly, the words bursting forth before he could consider them. Olivia blinked. "Excuse me." "I've seen it before," Mason continued, a bitterness he hadn't intended seeping into his voice. "Single women thinking a widower with children is an easy path to marriage and security." Her cheeks flushed with anger. "Mr. Irwin, I assure you I have no interest in marriage to you or anyone else. I came here for honest work and fair wages, nothing more." She gathered her horse's reins. "But I see I've wasted my time." As she turned to mount her horse, Mason felt a twinge of regret. His cynicism had gotten the better of him, and now he was about to lose perhaps his only chance at the help he desperately needed. "Wait," he called. When she paused, he continued, "I apologize. That was unfair." Olivia turned back, her expression guarded. Mason took a deep breath. "The truth is, I do need help. The cattle drive starts in 3 weeks, and I can't manage it alone." He hesitated. "I can offer you the job on a trial basis. 2 weeks. If it works out, you can stay on through the summer." She considered this, her green eyes assessing him carefully. "And my accommodations?" "There's a small cabin about 50 yards behind the main house. It's basic but sound, used to be for the previous ranch hand before he left for the mines last fall." After a long moment, Olivia nodded. "I accept your offer, Mr. Irwin. 2 weeks to prove my worth." "You can start by helping me finish the repairs on that corral fence," Mason said, already turning toward the barn. "And Miss Marshall?" "Yes." "The children are off limits. I'll not have them getting attached to someone who might not stay." Her eyes flashed again, but she nodded curtly. "As you wish, Mr. Irwin, though you might find it difficult to keep children from being friendly." As Mason led her toward the barn to gather tools, he couldn't shake the feeling that his orderly, isolated life had just been irrevocably disrupted. But the ranch needed help, and for now, that had to take precedence over his discomfort. Olivia Marshall might be trouble, but she was the only option he had. By the end of her first week at the Irwin Ranch, Olivia had proven her worth several times over. She rose before dawn each day, helped with the morning chores, and worked alongside Mason with a quiet competence that he grudgingly admired. She could rope and ride as well as any cowhand he'd ever employed, and her knowledge of cattle was extensive. What Mason hadn't counted on was the effect her presence would have on his children. Despite his instructions to maintain distance, the twins gravitated toward Olivia whenever she was near the house. Emma especially found excuses to be in Olivia's vicinity, watching with wide-eyed fascination as the young woman went about her tasks. On Saturday afternoon, Mason returned from checking the north pasture to find Olivia sitting on the porch steps with Emma beside her. His daughter's honey-blonde hair was being carefully braided by Olivia's nimble fingers, while Elijah sat nearby, whittling a stick with the small knife Mason had recently gifted him. The domestic scene sent an unexpected pang through Mason's chest, a mixture of longing and unease that made him pull his horse up short. For a moment, he simply watched them, struck by how natural they looked together in the golden afternoon light. When Emma spotted him, she jumped up, causing Olivia to quickly tie off the half-finished braid. "Pa, Miss Olivia is teaching me to braid my hair like hers." Mason dismounted, leading his horse toward the barn. "I thought we agreed you'd keep your distance from my children," he said in a low voice when he passed Olivia. She stood, dusting off her riding skirt. "They approached me, Mr. Irwin. I didn't have the heart to send them away when all Emma wanted was help with her hair." Her green eyes met his steadily. "Children need more than food and shelter. They need attention and care." "And that's my responsibility, not yours," Mason replied stiffly. "Pa, don't be cross," Emma said, looking between them with a frown. "I asked Miss Olivia to help because my hair gets all tangled and you don't know how to fix it proper." Mason felt a flush of embarrassment. It was true he struggled with his daughter's hair, usually resorting to simply pulling it back with a ribbon. Sarah had been the one who braided and styled Emma's fine blonde curls. Olivia's expression softened. "Your father does a fine job taking care of you, Emma," she said, "but sometimes ladies need to help each other with certain things." Mason cleared his throat, uncomfortable with the conversation. "Elijah, put that knife away and help me with the horse. Emma, go wash up for supper." The children obeyed, though Emma cast a longing look at Olivia before heading into the house. "Mr. Irwin," Olivia said once they were alone, "I understand your concern, but—" "No, you don't," Mason cut her off. "You don't understand what it's like to raise children alone, to be both mother and father to them, to worry constantly that you're failing them in ways you can't even see." Olivia's expression was surprisingly compassionate. "You're right, I don't know what that's like, but I do know what it's like to lose a parent and to miss a woman's touch in my life. My mother died when I was 10. The revelation caught Mason off guard. He'd made assumptions about Olivia's privileged upbringing on her father's ranch, never considering she might understand loss as intimately as he did. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice rough. "I didn't know." "How could you? You've never asked anything about me beyond my ability to work cattle." There was no accusation in her tone, merely observation. Mason shifted uncomfortably. It was true, he had deliberately kept their interactions impersonal, focusing solely on the work at hand. Learning about Olivia as a person meant letting her become more than just hired help, and that felt dangerous in ways he wasn't ready to examine. "Tomorrow's Sunday," he said, changing the subject. "We don't work Sundays except for essential chores. You're welcome to ride into town if you'd like." "Thank you," Olivia hesitated. "Actually, I was wondering if I might attend church with you and the children. I haven't been to services since arriving in Silver Creek." The request was reasonable, yet Mason found himself reluctant. The thought of arriving at the small Silver Creek church with Olivia beside him and the twins would set tongues wagging throughout the county. People would assume things, draw conclusions, yet he could hardly deny her the right to attend church. "We leave at 8, he said finally. "The service starts at 10, but the ride takes nearly 2 hours." Olivia nodded. "I'll be ready." As she turned to head back to her cabin, Mason found himself watching her go, noting the graceful way she moved and the sun highlighting the rich chestnut tones in her hair. He quickly looked away, busying himself with his horse's tack. Olivia Marshall was an employee, nothing more. The fact that his children were already growing attached to her only reinforced his decision to keep his walls firmly in place. When the summer ended and she moved on, as everyone eventually did in this harsh country, he would be the one left to comfort Emma and Elijah through another loss. No, better to maintain his distance. The frontier had taught Mason that sentiment was a luxury he couldn't afford, especially not with his children's hearts at stake. The following morning dawned clear and cool, a perfect spring day for the ride to Silver Creek. Mason hitched the team to the small wagon while the twins, dressed in their Sunday best, fidgeted impatiently on the porch. Emma's hair was neatly braided, his own clumsy attempt that had taken far longer than it should have, and Elijah's dark hair was slicked down with water, though a rebellious cowlick already threatened to spring free. When Olivia emerged from her cabin, Mason found himself momentarily speechless. She wore a simple blue dress that complemented her fair skin and brought out the green in her eyes. Her chestnut hair was arranged in an elegant coil at the nape of her neck, with a few soft tendrils framing her face. Without her usual practical riding clothes, the feminine curves of her figure were more evident, and Mason forced himself to look away. "Miss Olivia, you look like a princess," Emma exclaimed, running to meet her. Olivia laughed, the sound bright in the morning air. "Hardly that, but thank you, Emma, you look very pretty yourself." Mason cleared his throat. "We should get started if we want to arrive on time." The ride to Silver Creek passed more pleasantly than Mason had anticipated. The twins, excited by the outing, chattered constantly, asking Olivia questions about everything from her favorite color to whether she knew how to bake gingerbread like their mother used to. Mason tensed at the mention of Sarah but was surprised when Olivia handled the question with gentle candor. "I don't know your mother's recipe," she told them, "but I do make gingerbread. Perhaps someday your father will allow me to bake some for you." Emma turned hopeful eyes to Mason, who found himself nodding before he could think better of it. "That would be nice," he said stiffly. As they approached Silver Creek, the small church's white steeple came into view, rising above the collection of wooden buildings that comprised the growing town. Mason guided the wagon down the main street, nodding greetings to familiar faces. He was acutely aware of the curious glances directed at Olivia, sitting beside him on the wagon seat with the twins between them. Outside the church, Mason helped Emma and Elijah down from the wagon, then offered his hand to Olivia out of ingrained politeness. As her fingers clasped his, he felt an unexpected jolt of awareness that made him release her hand perhaps more quickly than courtesy dictated. "Mason Irwin," called a familiar voice. "Haven't seen you in town these past few weeks." Sheriff Thomas Clark approached, his weathered face breaking into a smile as he reached out to shake Mason's hand. The older man's eyes moved curiously to Olivia. "Sheriff Clark, this is Miss Olivia Marshall," Mason said, uncomfortably aware of the attention they were attracting. "She's working at the ranch for the season." If the sheriff found this arrangement unusual, he had the tact not to show it. "A pleasure to meet you, Miss Marshall. Welcome to Silver Creek." "Thank you, Sheriff," Olivia replied with a warm smile. "It's a lovely town." "Uncle Thomas," Elijah exclaimed, using the honorary title the children had bestowed on the sheriff, who had been a friend to Mason since his arrival in the territory 6 years earlier. "Miss Olivia can ride better than Pa. She caught a calf that got through the fence yesterday, and Pa couldn't even see where it went." Mason felt heat rise to his face as Thomas chuckled. "Is that so? Sounds like you found yourself a capable ranch hand, Mason." "Miss Marshall has proven quite competent," Mason acknowledged stiffly. As they made their way into the church, Mason was conscious of whispers and glances following them. He guided the twins to his usual pew, with Olivia settling beside Emma. The service passed in a blur for Mason, his attention divided between the Reverend's sermon on forgiveness and his acute awareness of Olivia's presence beside his family. When the service concluded, several of the town's women descended upon them, curiosity thinly veiled behind welcomes and introductions. Mason watched as Olivia handled their not-so-subtle inquiries with grace and poise, neither confirming nor denying their obvious assumptions about her relationship to him. "Your Miss Marshall seems a fine young woman," Sheriff Clark commented, appearing at Mason's side as they stood outside the church while the children played with other youngsters on the small patch of grass. She's not my Miss Marshall, Mason corrected quickly. She's an employee. Thomas raised an eyebrow. If you say so. He glanced toward Olivia, who was engaged in conversation with the Reverend's wife. Though I can't help noticing the way she looks at those children of yours, and the way you look at her when you think no one's watching. Mason stiffened. You're imagining things, Thomas. The older man clapped him on the shoulder. Maybe so. But Sarah's been gone 2 years now, Mason. She wouldn't want you to spend the rest of your life alone. Before Mason could formulate a response, Emma came running up, tugging at his hand. Pa, Mrs. Fletcher invited us to Sunday dinner at her house. Can we go, please? She said Miss Olivia is welcome too. Mason hesitated. Ada Fletcher was a kindly widow who often extended such invitations, but he usually declined, preferring to return to the ranch rather than engage in social obligations. It would be rude to refuse such a generous invitation, Olivia said, joining them with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. However, if you'd prefer to return to the ranch, Mr. Irwin, I'm certain Mrs. Fletcher would understand. Something in her tone, a hint of challenge perhaps, made Mason straighten his shoulders. We accept Mrs. Fletcher's invitation with gratitude, he found himself saying. It's been too long since the children enjoyed a proper Sunday dinner. The flash of surprise and pleasure in Olivia's green eyes made something unfamiliar stir in Mason's chest. He quickly tamped it down, reminding himself of the boundaries he had established. Olivia Marshall was temporary, a hired hand who would move on when the season ended. Allowing himself, or worse, his children, to become attached would only lead to more pain. As they walked toward the Fletcher home, Emma slipped her small hand into Olivia's, chattering excitedly about the promised apple pie. Mason watched their joined hands, a complicated emotion tightening his throat. Emma had taken to Olivia with a swiftness that both warmed and worried him. His daughter needed a woman's influence, that much was clear, but Olivia's presence was temporary. When she left, Emma would be heartbroken. Yet watching Olivia lean down to listen intently to his daughter's ramblings, her face animated and genuinely interested, Mason couldn't bring himself to separate them. Perhaps just for today he could allow his children this simple joy, without worrying about tomorrow's consequences. The following week brought a shift in the weather, with spring storms rolling across the valley. The rain was much needed for the parched earth but made ranch work more challenging. Mason and Olivia spent long hours moving young calves and their mothers to sheltered areas and repairing fences damaged by wind and lightning. One afternoon, as they rode back to the ranch house, soaked to the skin from a sudden cloudburst, Mason found himself studying Olivia's profile. Her wet hair clung to her cheeks, and despite the discomfort, she rode with the same easy grace that had first impressed him. 2 weeks had passed since her arrival, the trial period he had initially set, yet neither of them had mentioned it. Somehow, it seemed understood that she would stay through the summer as originally discussed. The eastern pasture should be safe for now, Olivia said, breaking into his thoughts. Though we'll need to check that creek crossing again if this rain continues. The water was already rising when we left. Mason nodded. We'll ride out first thing tomorrow if the rain lets up. As they approached the ranch house, Mason was surprised to see no smoke rising from the chimney. Mrs. Peterson, their elderly neighbor who looked after the twins when both Mason and Olivia were working far from the house, usually kept the fire going, especially on wet days like this. A prickle of unease ran down Mason's spine. Something's wrong, he said, urging his horse into a gallop with Olivia close behind. They dismounted quickly at the hitching post, and Mason strode to the door, calling out as he entered. Mrs. Peterson, Emma, Elijah. Mrs. Peterson appeared from the children's small bedroom, her weathered face creased with worry. Oh, Mason, thank goodness you're back. It's Elijah. He's taken ill. Fever came on sudden like about an hour ago. Emma's fine, but the boy's burning up. Mason's heart clenched with fear as he rushed to his son's bedside. Elijah lay small and pale against the sheets, his dark hair plastered to his forehead with sweat, his cheeks flushed with fever. Emma sat beside her brother, her blue eyes wide with worry. Pa, she whispered. Elijah said his throat hurts real bad. Mason placed a hand on his son's forehead, alarmed by the heat radiating from his skin. Memories of Sarah's illness, the rapid onset, the fever that wouldn't break, flashed through his mind, sending a cold wave of panic through him. "We need to get the doctor," he said, his voice tight with fear. "Silver Creek's too far in this weather," Mrs. Peterson said, wringing her hands. "The creek will be flooded by now." "I'll go," Olivia said from the doorway, her voice calm and determined. "I know a shortcut through the eastern ridge that avoids the main creek crossing." Mason turned to her, torn between desperate gratitude and fear for her safety. "It's dangerous in this storm. The trails will be washed out." "I grew up riding these mountains," Olivia replied, already moving toward the door. "I'll bring Dr. Harper back as quickly as I can." Before Mason could protest further, she was gone. Through the window, he watched her mount her horse and ride out into the driving rain, her figure quickly swallowed by the gray curtain of water. The hours that followed were among the longest of Mason's life. He bathed Elijah's burning forehead with cool water, coaxed him to swallow sips of willow bark tea that Mrs. Peterson prepared and tried to comfort Emma, who refused to leave her twin's side. As darkness fell and the storm continued to rage outside, Mason found himself praying for the first time since Sarah's death for his son's life and for Olivia's safe return. It was well past midnight when hoofbeats splashed into the yard. Mason rushed to the door, relief flooding through him at the sight of Olivia, drenched and exhausted but alive, helping an equally sodden Dr. Harper dismount. "Thank God," Mason breathed, hurrying to assist them. "Nearly lost the trail twice," Dr. Harper said as he shrugged off his dripping coat. "Would have turned back if not for Miss Marshall here. Never seen a woman ride like that, especially in weather that would send most men scurrying for shelter." Olivia swayed slightly as she entered the house, her face pale with exhaustion. Mason caught her arm, steadying her. "You're half frozen," he said, concern evident in his voice. "Mrs. Peterson, can you find some dry clothes for Miss Marshall while I show the doctor to Elijah?" As Dr. Harper examined his son, Mason paced the small main room, his thoughts divided between worry for Elijah and concern for Olivia, who had risked her life to bring help. When the doctor finally emerged from the bedroom, his expression was grave but not despairing. "It's strep throat, not typhoid," he said, correctly interpreting Mason's greatest fear. "Serious enough, especially in children, but treatable. I've given him something for the fever and pain. He should start improving by morning, but he'll need careful watching for the next few days." The relief that washed over Mason was so profound that he had to grip the back of a chair to steady himself. "Thank you, doctor." "Don't thank me, thank that remarkable young woman who braved the storm to fetch me." Dr. Harper glanced toward the kitchen where Mrs. Peterson was helping Olivia into dry clothing. She refused to stop even when the bridge at Miller's Creek washed out. "Found an old Indian crossing downstream that I didn't even know existed." After the doctor had provided instructions for Elijah's care and accepted Mason's offer to stay the night rather than attempting the return journey in the continuing storm, Mason sought out Olivia. He found her in the kitchen, wrapped in one of Sarah's old dresses, the sight causing an unexpected pang in his chest, her hands curled around a mug of hot tea. "How is Elijah?" she asked immediately, her eyes concerned. "The fever's coming down," Mason said, his voice rough with emotion. "Dr. Harper says he should recover fully with rest and care." He hesitated, then continued, his words halting. "Miss Marshall, Olivia, what you did tonight. I don't have words adequate to thank you." Olivia's tired face softened. "There's no need for thanks, Mr. Irwin. I couldn't stand by while Elijah needed help." "You risked your life," Mason said, moving closer. "The creek crossings, the mountain trails in the dark, you could have been killed." "Some risks are worth taking," she replied simply. In that moment, looking at her pale face framed by damp hair, wearing his dead wife's dress yet somehow not seeming out of place in his kitchen, Mason felt something shift inside him. The walls he had so carefully constructed around his heart developed a small but significant crack. "You should rest," he said, his voice gentler than it had been since her arrival. "You can take my bed. I'll sit with Elijah." Olivia shook her head. "I'm fine here by the fire. You should be with your children." Their eyes held for a long moment, and Mason felt an unfamiliar warmth spreading through his chest. Without thinking, he reached out and touched her hand where it rested on the table, a brief contact, but deliberate. "Thank you," he said again, the words carrying weight beyond their simple meaning. Olivia's fingers curled slightly, acknowledging his touch before he withdrew. "You're welcome, Mason," she replied softly, using his given name for the first time. As Mason returned to his son's bedside, he found himself replaying that moment in the kitchen, the connection he had felt, the way his name had sounded in her voice. It both comforted and unsettled him, this subtle shift in their relationship. Elijah stirred in his sleep, his fever-flushed face relaxing as the medicine took effect. Beside him, Emma had finally succumbed to exhaustion, curled protectively next to her twin. Looking at his children, Mason was struck by how close he had come to losing his son tonight, and how different the outcome might have been without Olivia's courage. The realization that he was beginning to depend on her presence, to value her for more than just her work on the ranch, was unsettling. Mason had convinced himself that emotional attachments were dangerous, that keeping people at a distance was the only way to protect himself and his children from further loss. Yet tonight, Olivia Marshall had risked everything for his family, asking nothing in return. That simple act of selflessness challenged everything Mason thought he knew about keeping his heart safely guarded. As rain continued to drum against the roof, Mason stroked his son's cooling forehead and allowed himself, just for a moment, to consider the possibility that he might have been wrong about what the frontier demanded of a man, and what his heart could still feel, despite his determination to keep it locked away. The days following Elijah's illness brought subtle but significant changes to the rhythm of life at the Irwin ranch. As his son recovered, Mason found himself observing Olivia with new eyes, noticing details he had previously overlooked or deliberately ignored, the gentleness with which she tended to Elijah during his convalescence, reading stories and playing quiet games when he grew restless. The way she taught Emma to make simple biscuits, her patience never wavering despite the flour that seemed to cover every surface, the quiet competence she brought to her work, never complaining even when tasks were difficult or unpleasant. More disturbing to Mason's peace of mind was his growing awareness of her as a woman, the graceful curve of her neck when she bent to examine a fence post, the musical quality of her laugh when something amused her, the scent of lavender that seemed to linger in rooms she had occupied. These unwelcome observations left Mason confused and irritable. He had built his life around the certainty that emotional attachments were a liability in the harsh reality of frontier existence. Yet Olivia's presence was challenging that belief, making him question whether isolation was truly the only path to protecting himself and his children. One evening, nearly 2 weeks after Elijah's illness, Mason stood on the porch watching the sunset paint the distant mountains in shades of gold and purple. The spring branding was complete, and the upcoming cattle drive to the railhead in Helena was well planned. Much of that success was due to Olivia's contributions, her knowledge of cattle, her willingness to work from dawn until dusk, her innovative solutions to problems that arose. The sound of laughter drew his attention to the small garden beside the house, where Olivia was helping the twins plant the vegetable seeds that would provide food for the coming months. Emma was carefully placing beans in the furrows Olivia had drawn, while Elijah, still moving slowly but recovering well, poured water from a small bucket over the freshly planted rows. The domestic scene struck Mason with unexpected force. It had been so long since he had heard his children laugh with such abandon, had seen them engaged in an activity that wasn't tinged with the melancholy that had settled over the household after Sarah's death. "Look, Pa," Emma called, noticing him watching. "We're planting food for the summer. Miss Olivia says we can have fresh corn and beans and tomatoes." Mason moved closer, smiling despite himself at his daughter's enthusiasm. "That's quite an ambitious garden you've got planned." "Miss Olivia says we need to plant extra for the deer and rabbits," Elijah explained seriously. "They'll eat some, but there'll be plenty left for us too." Olivia straightened, brushing dirt from her hands. The late afternoon sun caught the auburn highlights in her chestnut hair, forming a sort of halo around her face. "I hope you don't mind," she said, a hint of uncertainty in her voice. "The children were asking about gardens, and I thought it might be good for them to learn how food grows." "I don't mind," Mason said, surprised to find it was true. Sarah always wanted a proper vegetable garden, but with the ranch work and the twins being so young, he trailed off, realizing he had mentioned his wife in casual conversation for the first time in 2 years. Something soft flickered in Olivia's eyes. "Children thrive when they can see the results of their work," she said. "My father taught me that." "Our pa teaches us lots of things too," Emma said loyally, leaning against Mason's leg. He showed us how to fish and ride horses and count to 100. Your father is a very good teacher, Olivia agreed, her gaze meeting Mason's over the children's heads. The simple compliment shouldn't have affected him, yet Mason felt a warmth spread through his chest. It's getting late, he said, more gruffly than he intended. Time to wash up for supper. As the children raced toward the house, Mason found himself alone with Olivia for the first time in days. An awkward silence fell between them, filled with unspoken thoughts. The garden was a good idea, Mason finally said. Thank you for taking the time with them. Olivia nodded, gathering up the gardening tools. They're wonderful children, Mason, intelligent and kind. You've done well with them, especially under difficult circumstances. The genuine admiration in her voice caught him off guard. I've done my best, he said simply. Though sometimes I wonder if it's enough. It is, Olivia said with quiet certainty. They're happy, healthy, and secure in your love. What more could children need? The question hung in the air between them, and Mason found himself unable to articulate the doubts that plagued him, that the twins needed a mother's touch, a woman's guidance, a complete family rather than just a father struggling to fill both roles. We should head in, he said instead, taking some of the tools from her hands. Their fingers brushed briefly, and Mason felt that now familiar jolt of awareness that both disturbed and intrigued him. Later that night, after the children were asleep, Mason sat at the kitchen table reviewing his accounts for the upcoming cattle drive. The figures were better than he had expected, largely due to the reduced need for hired help now that Olivia was handling work that would have required at least 2 additional hands. A soft knock at the door drew his attention. Olivia stood there, a shawl wrapped around her shoulders against the evening chill. I'm sorry to disturb you, she said. I was wondering if you had any more of that liniment for sore muscles. My shoulder's a bit stiff from digging in the garden. Mason nodded, rising to retrieve the bottle from a cabinet. Old Hank Peterson makes it. Works better than anything from the mercantile. Olivia accepted the bottle with a grateful smile. Thank you, she hesitated, then added, I've been meaning to ask, what are your plans for the children during the cattle drive? Will Mrs. Peterson stay with them? The question caught Mason unprepared. In previous years, he had arranged for Mrs. Peterson to care for the twins during the drive, but the elderly woman had recently mentioned that her daughter in Bozeman was expecting a child and had asked for her help. I haven't quite figured that out yet, Mason admitted. Mrs. Peterson may not be available this year. Olivia nodded thoughtfully. I could stay with them, she offered. You have enough men hired for the drive now, and the children are comfortable with me. The suggestion made practical sense, yet Mason found himself reluctant. Having Olivia care for his children during his absence felt like crossing a boundary he had carefully maintained, acknowledging her as more than just a ranch hand, allowing her further into their lives. That's generous of you, he said slowly, but the cattle drive is why I hired you. Your skills would be valuable on the trail. More valuable than ensuring your children are safe and well cared for, Olivia countered gently. Besides, I can continue the ranch work here while you're gone. The garden will need tending, and there are always fences to mend and horses to exercise. Mason studied her face in the lamplight, searching for ulterior motives and finding only sincere concern. You've come to care for them, he said, the realization both warming and alarming him. I have, Olivia admitted without hesitation. They're remarkable children, Mason. It would be impossible not to care for them. The simple honesty of her response disarmed him, and when the summer ends, when you move on. The questions emerged more sharply than he intended. Olivia's expression grew serious. Children are more resilient than we give them credit for. They'll remember that someone cared for them, helped them plant a garden, read them stories. Those are good memories to have, even if people don't stay forever. Her words struck close to fears Mason had harbored since her arrival, that the twins would grow attached, only to face another loss when Olivia inevitably left. Yet there was wisdom in what she said, a perspective he hadn't considered. I'll think about it, he said finally. Olivia nodded, seemingly content with this non-committal response. Good night, Mason, she said softly, turning to leave. Olivia, he called as she reached the door. When she looked back, he found himself saying, Thank you for everything you've done for us these past weeks. A smile curved her lips, transforming her face in the golden lamplight. "You're welcome." After she had gone, Mason remained at the table, his account books forgotten. Olivia Marshall had breached his defenses in ways he hadn't anticipated, challenging his belief that emotional isolation was the only safe path in a world where loss lurked around every corner. More unsettling was the realization that he was beginning to care for her, not just as a valued employee or as someone who was kind to his children, but as a woman whose presence had begun to feel essential to his happiness. That night, as Mason lay in bed staring at the ceiling, he acknowledged a truth he had been avoiding. The walls he had built around his heart were crumbling, and he wasn't entirely certain he wanted to rebuild them. The preparations for the cattle drive intensified over the following week. Mason hired 4 additional hands, experienced cowboys who had worked for him in previous years, and the ranch became a hub of activity as they gathered the herd, checked equipment, and planned the route to Helena. Olivia worked alongside the men, her skills earning grudging respect from even the most skeptical of the cowboys. Mason often found his gaze drawn to her as she maneuvered her horse with easy confidence, her chestnut hair gleaming in the sunlight, her movements fluid and assured. "That's some woman you've got there," commented Jake Miller, one of the older hands, as they watched Olivia expertly cut a reluctant steer from a stand of brush. "Never seen a lady handle cattle like that." Mason stiffened slightly at the possessive implication. "Miss Marshall is an excellent ranch hand," he said neutrally. Jake gave him a sidelong glance, a knowing smile tugging at his weathered face. "If you say so, boss." The exchange left Mason unsettled, aware that others were noticing what he was trying to deny to himself, that Olivia had become something more than an employee in his eyes. His decision about the cattle drive still weighed on him. Practical considerations argued for accepting Olivia's offer to stay with the children. Mrs. Peterson had confirmed she would be traveling to Bozeman, and finding another suitable caretaker for the twins on short notice would be difficult. Yet having Olivia assume such a maternal role felt like a significant step, one Mason wasn't certain he was ready to take. The matter was settled unexpectedly one afternoon when Mason overheard a conversation between Olivia and the twins as they gathered eggs from the chicken coop. "Will you go away with Pa on the cattle drive?" Emma asked, her voice carrying clearly through the open window. "I'm not sure yet," Olivia replied. "Your father hasn't decided." "I hope you stay with us," Elijah said earnestly. "Mrs. Peterson always falls asleep in the afternoon, and she can't play checkers or read stories like you do. And she makes us eat prunes," Emma added with evident disgust. "Everyday prunes." Olivia's laugh floated through the air. "Well, prunes are good for you, but perhaps not every day." "If you stay, will you make gingerbread?" Elijah asked hopefully, "and tell us more stories about when you were little and lived on your pa's ranch?" "I might," Olivia said, her voice warm with affection. "But that's for your father to decide. He wants what's best for you." "You're what's best," Emma stated with a child's simple certainty. "You make Pa smile sometimes now. He didn't smile much before you came." Mason stepped back from the window, Emma's words striking him with unexpected force. Had he been so obviously unhappy that even his 5-year-old daughter had noticed? And was it true that Olivia's presence had changed that? Reflecting honestly, Mason had to admit it was. The ranch felt different now, lighter somehow, less weighted with grief and isolation. The twins were happier, more animated, and he himself had begun to look forward to evenings when they would all gather for supper, to the sound of Olivia's voice as she shared stories from her day, to the casual brushing of her hand against his when passing a plate or cup. That evening, after the children were asleep, Mason found Olivia on the porch, her gaze fixed on the star-filled sky. The quarter moon cast enough light to illuminate her profile, and Mason paused for a moment, struck by how right she looked there, as if she belonged on his porch at his ranch in his life. "It's settled," he said, moving to stand beside her at the porch rail. "You'll stay with the children during the drive." Olivia turned to him, her expression questioning. "You're certain? I know you had reservations." Mason nodded. "They trust you, and so do I." The simple declaration hung in the air between them, weighted with meaning beyond the immediate discussion of the cattle drive. Olivia's eyes widened slightly, and Mason wondered if she understood what it had cost him to admit that trust, how significant it was for a man who had closed himself off from emotional connections. "Thank you," she said softly. I promise I'll take good care of them. I know you will, Mason hesitated then added, Emma says you make me smile. A flush rose in Olivia's cheeks, visible even in the dim light. Children notice everything. They do, Mason agreed, and she's right. He turned to face Olivia fully, allowing himself to acknowledge what he had been fighting for weeks. You've brought something back to this ranch that I thought was gone forever. Not just your help with the work, but life, laughter. Olivia's breath caught audibly. Mason. I don't expect anything, he said quickly. I just wanted you to know that I value your presence here. More than I've been willing to admit, even to myself. The vulnerability of the confession left Mason feeling exposed, uncertain, but Olivia's response was to reach out and gently touch his hand where it rested on the porch rail. I value being here, she said simply, more than I expected to. The warmth of her fingers against his skin sent a current of awareness through Mason. It would be so easy to turn his hand, to clasp her fingers with his own, to take a step closer and discover if her lips were as soft as they looked in the moonlight. The thought startled him with its intensity, and Mason pulled back slightly, not yet ready to cross that line. It's getting late, he said, his voice rougher than he intended. We both have an early start tomorrow. Disappointment flickered briefly in Olivia's eyes before she nodded, stepping back. Good night, Mason. As she walked toward her cabin, Mason remained on the porch, his emotions in turmoil. The walls he had built around his heart were crumbling rapidly now, and the prospect both exhilarated and terrified him. Opening himself to feeling again meant opening himself to potential loss, to the kind of devastating grief he had experienced when Sarah died. Yet watching Olivia's figure disappear into the darkness, Mason wondered if the greater risk might be in never allowing himself to feel it all, in denying the possibility of happiness because he feared its eventual end. The cattle drive was set to begin in 3 days. 2 weeks on the trail would give him time to think, to consider what he truly wanted and what he was willing to risk to obtain it. For now, that seemed the wisest course, to step back, gain perspective, and return with a clearer mind. What Mason couldn't know was that fate had other plans that would force him to confront his fears much sooner than he anticipated. The morning of the cattle drive dawned clear and cool, with a hint of the summer heat that would build as the day progressed. The ranch yard was a hive of activity as the hired hands made final preparations, checking cinches, securing bedrolls, and readying the chuck wagon. Mason had risen before dawn to spend time with the twins, who were still sleepy-eyed as he sat on the edge of their beds, explaining once again that he would be gone for 2 weeks but would return with stories of the drive and perhaps small gifts from Helena. Will you bring me a doll? Emma asked, her blonde curls tousled from sleep. If you're good for Miss Olivia, Mason promised, smoothing her hair from her forehead. I want a real knife, Elijah declared, a big one. Mason chuckled. We'll see about that, maybe something a bit less dangerous. As the sun cleared the eastern ridge, Mason found himself lingering over goodbyes, reluctant to leave despite having made this same journey many times before. Something felt different this year, a pulling at his heart that had nothing to do with leaving the twins, who had stayed behind during previous drives, and everything to do with the woman who would care for them in his absence. Olivia stood on the porch, dressed in her practical riding skirt and blouse, her hair neatly braided. She had offered to help see them off, to ensure the cattle moved smoothly from the home pasture onto the trail that would take them north to Helena. You don't have to come for the first miles, Mason told her as they walked toward the saddled horses. The men can handle it. I know, Olivia replied with a small smile, but I'd like to. The children are still sleeping and Mrs. Peterson will be here when they wake up. The ride to the north pasture was quiet, the early morning filled with the sounds of horses' hooves and the distant lowing of cattle. Mason was acutely aware of Olivia beside him, of the graceful way she sat her horse, of the profile of her face against the brightening sky. You'll be careful, she said suddenly, breaking the silence. It wasn't quite a question, but her concern was evident. Always am, Mason replied. The route is well established and the men are experienced. Olivia nodded, her eyes on the horizon. The children will miss you terribly. I'll miss them too, Mason said, then added after a moment's hesitation, and I'll miss you. The admission surprised them both. Olivia's gaze flew to his face, searching for something in his expression. Whatever she saw there brought a soft flush to her cheeks. "I'll be here when you return," she said, her voice carrying a promise that seemed to encompass more than just her physical presence. They reached the herd, cutting short any further conversation as they joined the other hands in moving the cattle onto the trail. The work was familiar and demanding, requiring full concentration as the reluctant animals were guided away from their familiar pastures. It was nearly noon before the herd was properly on the trail, moving at the steady pace that would carry them to Helena over the next 2 weeks. Mason rode back to where Olivia waited at the edge of the property, preparing to return to the ranch house. "That's it then," he said, reining his horse beside hers. "We should make good time if the weather holds." Olivia nodded. "The children will want to mark each day on the calendar, watching for your return." Mason hesitated, suddenly reluctant to leave. There were things he wanted to say, feelings he was just beginning to acknowledge, but the timing felt wrong with the cattle drive beginning and the other hands watching from a discreet distance. "Take care of them," he said finally. "And yourself." "I will," Olivia promised. "Be safe, Mason." Their eyes held for a long moment, conveying what words could not. Then Mason nodded, turned his horse, and rode to join the hands and the moving herd. He didn't look back, though the urge to do so was strong. It was better this way, he told himself. 2 weeks to clear his head, to decide what he truly wanted, to consider the implications of allowing Olivia Marshall to become more than just a temporary presence in his and his children's lives. The first days of the drive passed uneventfully. The weather remained favorable, the cattle moved well, and the experienced hands managed their tasks with minimal direction. Mason found himself with too much time to think, his mind constantly returning to the ranch, to Olivia and the twins. On the 4th night, as they made camp near a small stream, Jake Miller settled beside Mason at the fire after the other hands had turned in. "Something on your mind, boss?" the older man asked, pouring coffee from the pot that hung over the flames. "You've been quieter than usual." Mason hesitated, then decided there was no harm in talking to Jake, who had worked for him since he first arrived in Montana and had been a friend to him after Sarah's death. "Just thinking about the ranch," he said, "the twins." Jake nodded sagely. "And that pretty Miss Marshall who's looking after them, I'd wager." Mason gave him a sharp glance. "Is it that obvious?" "Only to someone who's known you a while," Jake said with a small smile. "You look at her the way you used to look at Sarah, though I reckon you might not have noticed it yourself yet." The comparison startled Mason. "Sarah and I were married for 7 years. I've known Miss Marshall barely 2 months." "Time's not always the measure of such things," Jake observed, sipping his coffee. "Some folks know right away when they've found someone who fits them, like a key in a lock." Mason stared into the fire, considering the older man's words. "It feels disloyal somehow to Sarah's memory." Jake's weathered face softened with understanding. "Sarah was a fine woman who loved you and those children something fierce. You think she'd want you spending the rest of your days alone, or find someone to share your life with?" But that way the answer seemed clear. Sarah had been practical and loving, always concerned with Mason's happiness. She would have wanted him to find love again, to provide the twins with a mother's care. "It's not that simple," Mason said after a long moment. "Olivia, Miss Marshall, has her own plans, her own life. She took the job for the summer, nothing more." "Plans change," Jake said mildly, "especially when hearts get involved." Before Mason could respond, the sound of approaching hoofbeats drew their attention. One of the night guards rode into camp, his expression urgent. "Rider coming in fast," he reported, from the direction of Silver Creek. Mason rose quickly, his hand instinctively checking the revolver at his hip. Visitors in the middle of the night rarely brought good news. The rider appeared at the edge of the firelight, a young man Mason recognized as the son of Silver Creek's postmaster. His horse was lathered with sweat, evidence of a hard ride. "Mr. Irwin," the young man called, dismounting quickly. "Sheriff Clark sent me to find you. There's trouble back at your ranch." Mason's blood ran cold. "What kind of trouble?" "Outlaws," the young man said, catching his breath. "The Blackwell gang. They've been hitting isolated ranches all through the territory. Sheriff got word they were heading toward your place and sent me to warn you." "The Blackwell gang," Jake said sharply. "They're bad business, Mason." Killed a family over in the Bitterroot Valley last month when they resisted. Mason was already moving toward his horse, the twins, Olivia. Sheriffs gathered a posse, the messenger continued. They were riding out when I left town. Said to tell you they'll do what they can, but it's a good 2 hours to your place from Silver Creek. Terror gripped Mason's heart. His children and Olivia were alone at the ranch, vulnerable to men known for their brutality. The thought of what might happen to them made his blood run cold. Jake, you're in charge of the herd, Mason said, quickly gathering his saddlebags and rifle. Keep moving toward Helena. You can't ride alone, Jake protested. The Blackwells travel with at least 6 men. I'm not waiting for a posse, Mason said grimly, checking his ammunition. Those are my children. In the end, 2 of the younger hands volunteered to ride with him. They set out immediately, pushing their horses as fast as was safe in the darkness, taking the most direct route back toward the ranch. As Mason rode through the night, his mind filled with terrible images, the ranch house in flames, his children terrified, Olivia facing armed men alone. Fear and regret warred within him, fear for those he loved and regret for the words left unspoken, the feelings left unacknowledged. If anything happened to them, to her, before he had the chance to tell her what she had come to mean to him. Mason drove the thought away, focusing instead on the rhythm of his horse's hooves and the miles still stretching between him and home, between him and everything that mattered. Olivia knew something was wrong the moment she saw riders approaching from the east, following the old hunting trail rather than the main road to the ranch. It was mid-afternoon, and she had been in the garden with the twins, showing them how to tell when the peas were ready for picking. 6 men on horseback, moving with purpose, their faces obscured by the distance but their intent clear in the directness of their approach. No honest visitors would come that way, avoiding the main road with its clear sightlines. Children, Olivia said calmly, though her heart had begun to race, I need you to go inside right now. Emma looked up from the pea vine she had been examining, but we haven't finished picking. Now Emma, Olivia said, her tone brooking no argument. Take Elijah and go straight to your room, close the door and don't come out until I call you. Something in her voice must have conveyed the seriousness of the situation, for the twins obeyed immediately, hurrying toward the house with anxious glances over their shoulders. Olivia followed them inside, her mind racing. Mrs. Peterson had left that morning to visit her daughter in Bozeman, taking the small wagon that might have allowed them to flee. The nearest neighbor, old Hank Peterson, lived over 3 miles away, too far for the children to run. As the twins disappeared into their bedroom, Olivia moved quickly to the cabinet where Mason kept his Winchester rifle and revolver. She had grown up around firearms on her father's ranch and knew how to use them, though she had never had to shoot at a person. Loading the rifle with steady hands, Olivia positioned herself at the window that overlooked the approaching riders. They were close enough now that she could make out details, rough-looking men with the hard faces of those who lived outside the law. The leader rode slightly ahead, a tall man with a black hat and a scar that ran from his left eye to his jawline. The Blackwell Gang. Olivia had heard of them in Silver Creek, brutal outlaws who had been terrorizing isolated ranches throughout the territory, stealing horses and valuables, leaving destruction and sometimes death in their wake. Fear tightened her throat, but Olivia forced it down. She had to remain calm, to think clearly. The children depended on her. Moving to the bedroom, she found Emma and Elijah huddled together on Elijah's bed, their eyes wide with fear. Listen to me carefully, Olivia said, crouching before them. Some bad men are coming to the ranch. I need you to hide and be very, very quiet. Where's Pa? Elijah asked, his voice small. He's still on the cattle drive, Olivia answered, but Sheriff Clark will come soon. She hoped that was true, that someone in town had noticed the outlaw's direction and alerted the authorities. I'm scared, Emma whispered. Olivia touched her cheek gently. I know, sweetheart, but you're both very brave. Remember the hiding place your father showed you, the small cellar under the kitchen floor. The twins nodded. Mason had shown Olivia the hidden space shortly before leaving for the cattle drive, a small root cellar accessed through a trapdoor beneath the kitchen table, built when the house was first constructed as a place to store food and provide shelter during storms or, if necessary, attacks. I want you to go there now, Olivia continued. Take your quilts, be very quiet, and don't come out no matter what you hear, not until your father or I come for you. Do you understand? You're coming too, aren't you? Emma asked, clutching Olivia's hand. Olivia hesitated. Her instinct was to hide with the children to protect them directly. But someone needed to face the outlaws to prevent them from searching the house thoroughly enough to discover the hidden cellar. I'll come when I can, she said, the lie bitter on her tongue. Now hurry. She helped the twins gather their quilt and a few small comforts, Emma's rag doll, Elijah's wooden horse, and led them to the kitchen. Moving the table aside, she lifted the trapdoor and helped them down the narrow ladder into the small, earthen-floored space beneath. Remember, not a sound, Olivia whispered, looking into their frightened faces one last time. I love you both very much. The words came naturally, and in that moment Olivia realized their truth. Somewhere between teaching Emma to braid her hair and reading bedtime stories to Elijah, between garden planting and evening conversations by the fire, she had come to love these children as if they were her own. And their father Mason, with his quiet strength, his devotion to his children, his gradual warming to her presence in their lives. The realization that she loved him too struck her with painful clarity, made all the more acute by the danger now approaching. Closing the trapdoor and replacing the table, Olivia returned to the window. The riders had reached the yard, spreading out as they approached the house. The leader dismounted, signaling for the others to check the barn and outbuildings. Olivia took a deep breath, steadying her hands on the rifle. She had to keep them away from the house, away from the children, if she could hold them off until help arrived. The leader stepped onto the porch, his spurs jangling against the wooden boards. "Hello, the house," he called, his voice carrying a false friendliness that sent chills down Olivia's spine. "Anybody home?" Olivia remained silent, watching as he exchanged glances with one of his men who had dismounted to join him. After a moment, he tried the door, finding it unlocked. Olivia had not had time to secure it when rushing the children to safety. The door swung open and the outlaw stepped into the main room, his hand resting casually on the revolver at his hip. His eyes scanned the space, taking in the evidence of recent occupation, the children's toys in a corner, the remains of their midday meal still on the table. "We know you're in here," he called, moving further into the house. "No need to be shy, we just want to talk." Olivia stepped from the shadows of the hallway, the rifle held steady in her hands. "That's close enough," she said, her voice calmer than she felt. The outlaw stopped, a slow smile spreading across his scarred face. Well, what have we here?" His eyes moved over Olivia in a way that made her skin crawl. "All alone, are you, miss?" "As you can see," Olivia replied coldly. "And armed, I suggest you leave." He laughed, the sound utterly devoid of humor. "That's not how this works. I'm Garrett Blackwell, and this ranch is now under my control. You can make this easy or difficult, your choice." "There's nothing of value here," Olivia said. "The cattle are gone, on the drive to Helena." "Horses in the corral," Blackwell observed. "Food in the pantry, and you," his smile widened unpleasantly, "that's plenty for now." Olivia's finger tightened slightly on the trigger. "I won't ask again." "Leave now." Blackwell's expression hardened. "You really think you can take all of us with that rifle? My men are surrounding this house. One wrong move and—" The sound of small feet scuffling beneath the floorboards froze Olivia's blood. It was faint, likely unnoticeable to someone unfamiliar with the house, but it was there. One of the twins had moved. Blackwell's eyes narrowed. "What was that?" "Nothing," Olivia said quickly, "just the house settling." But the outlaw wasn't convinced. His gaze moved around the room more carefully now, searching. "You said you were alone," he said, his voice dangerously soft. "Were you lying to me?" "There's no one else here," Olivia insisted, her heart pounding as she tried to keep his attention focused on her and away from the kitchen. Blackwell took a step toward her, his hand moving to his gun. "Put down the rifle, girl. My patience is wearing thin." Olivia knew she had only moments before he would act. If she fired, his men would storm the house. If she surrendered, he would search until he found the children. Neither option was acceptable. "Last chance," Blackwell said, drawing his revolver with practiced speed. "Drop it." A sudden commotion outside drew his attention, shouts, then gunfire. Blackwell turned toward the door, momentarily distracted. It was all the opening Olivia needed. She fired, the bullet striking Blackwell in the shoulder rather than the chest she had aimed for. The outlaw staggered back with a howl of pain and rage, raising his gun toward her. Olivia ducked behind the wall as his shot splintered the doorframe where she had been standing. More gunfire erupted outside, not just the sporadic shots of the outlaws, but the concentrated volleys of what sounded like multiple weapons. "Boss, it's a posse," one of Blackwell's men shouted from outside. "Coming in fast." Blackwell cursed, clutching his bleeding shoulder. "Kill her," he ordered, staggering toward the door. "Burn the house, we need to move." The man who had followed him onto the porch advanced into the house, his gun drawn. Olivia fired again from her position in the hallway, missing as he ducked behind the large oak cabinet that stood against the wall. A deadly game of cat and mouse began, with Olivia retreating further into the house, using corners and doorways for cover as the outlaw pursued her. The continued gunfire outside told her that help had indeed arrived, Sheriff Clark's posse, perhaps, but the immediate danger remained. Olivia knew she needed to keep the outlaw away from the kitchen, away from where the twins were hidden. She moved toward the bedroom instead, hoping to draw him away from the heart of the house. The strategy worked. The outlaw followed, cautious but determined, his gun held ready as he approached the bedroom door where Olivia waited. She had one bullet left in the rifle. It had to count. As the outlaw's shadow fell across the threshold, Olivia steadied her breath, remembering her father's lessons from long ago. Wait until you have a clear shot. Squeeze, don't pull. The outlaw stepped into view, and Olivia fired. The rifle's report was deafening in the confined space. The outlaw crumpled to the floor, his gun discharging harmlessly into the wall as he fell. Silence fell, broken only by the increasingly distant sounds of gunfire outside. Olivia remained frozen for a long moment, her hands shaking as the reality of what she had done sank in. She had taken a man's life to protect the children. The knowledge was both terrible and necessary. Carefully stepping past the fallen outlaw, Olivia made her way back to the main room. Through the open door, she could see figures moving in the yard, men on horseback pursuing the fleeing outlaws, others converging on the house. And one rider ahead of the rest, dismounting with frantic speed and running toward the house, a figure Olivia recognized instantly despite the distance. Mason. He burst through the door, his face pale with fear, his eyes wild as they scanned the room and found her standing there, the empty rifle still clutched in her hands. "Olivia," he breathed, covering the distance between them in 3 long strides. His hands gripped her shoulders, his eyes searching her face, her body, for signs of injury. "Are you hurt? Where are the children?" "I'm fine," Olivia said, her voice shaking with delayed reaction. "The twins are safe, hidden in the cellar beneath the kitchen." Relief washed over Mason's face, so profound that it seemed to age him and then restore his youth in the space of a heartbeat. Without warning, he pulled Olivia into his arms, holding her tightly against his chest. "I thought I'd lost you," he murmured into her hair. "All of you." Olivia allowed herself to sink into his embrace, the strength and warmth of him a balm to her shattered nerves. "How did you know?" she asked, her voice muffled against his shirt. "Word reached us on the drive," Mason explained, still holding her close. "I rode back as fast as I could. The sheriff and his men met us on the road." Footsteps on the porch announced Sheriff Clark's arrival. "Mason, Miss Marshall," he called, entering cautiously. "Everyone all right in here?" Mason released Olivia reluctantly, turning to face the sheriff. "The children are hidden. Olivia kept them safe." Sheriff Clark nodded, his weathered face grim as he noted the body of the outlaw visible through the bedroom door. "Blackwell got away with 2 of his men, but we got the rest. They won't trouble this territory again." He looked at Olivia with new respect. "You held them off alone, Miss Marshall. That's no small feat." "The children," Olivia said, suddenly remembering the twins still hidden below. "They must be terrified." She moved quickly to the kitchen, Mason right behind her. Together they moved the table and opened the trapdoor, revealing the twins huddled together in the darkness below. "Pa!" they cried in unison, their faces transforming from fear to joy as they recognized their father. Mason reached down to lift them out, gathering both children into his arms with a fierceness born of fear and relief. "You're safe now," he murmured, pressing kisses to their heads. "Everything's all right." Emma looked past her father to where Olivia stood, tears streaming unchecked down her face at the sight of the reunited family. Miss Olivia saved us, she said solemnly. She said she loves us. Mason's gaze lifted to Olivia's face, something unreadable in his eyes. Did she now? Olivia wiped at her tears, suddenly self-conscious. I told them what they needed to hear in a frightening situation, she said quietly. And was it true? Mason asked, his voice low and intent despite the children in his arms, the sheriff in the next room, the chaos of the afternoon still surrounding them. Olivia hesitated only briefly before nodding. Yes, she admitted, it was true. The afternoon blurred into evening as the sheriff and his men secured the ranch, removed the dead outlaw, and posted guards in case Blackwell and his remaining men attempted to return. Mason kept the twins close, allowing them to process the day's events through their chatter and questions, reassuring them constantly of their safety. Olivia moved through these hours as if in a dream, preparing a simple meal for the children, answering the sheriff's questions about what had happened, avoiding Mason's gaze when it sought hers across the room. She had revealed too much in that moment of emotional vulnerability, and now uncertainty plagued her. It was late when Sheriff Clark and his men finally departed, promising to return in the morning. The twins, exhausted by fear and excitement, fell asleep almost immediately, unwilling to be separated from each other or their father. Mason carried them to his own bed, larger than their small ones, where they could remain together through the night. When he returned to the main room, he found Olivia at the hearth, staring into the small fire she had built to ward off the evening chill. "You should rest," he said, his voice gentle. "You've been through an ordeal today." Olivia nodded, not turning from the fire. "I'll retire shortly." Mason moved to stand beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "Olivia, what you did today. There are no words adequate to thank you for protecting my children." "They're precious children," Olivia said simply. "I couldn't let anything happen to them." "You risked your life," Mason continued. "You could have hidden with them, but you chose to face armed men alone." Now Olivia turned to look at him, her green eyes reflecting the firelight. "What would you have done?" "The same," Mason acknowledged, "but I'm their father." "You," he broke off, struggling to articulate what he meant. "I'm just the hired help," Olivia finished for him, a hint of bitterness in her tone. "Here for the season, nothing more." Mason's expression grew intent. "Is that what you believe? That you're just an employee to me, to us?" The question hung between them, fraught with meaning. Olivia's heart beat faster as Mason moved closer, his eyes never leaving hers. "I told the children I love them," Olivia said softly. "And it's true, somewhere in these past weeks, they've become precious to me in a way I never expected." "And their father?" Mason asked, his voice rough with emotion. "What of him?" Olivia took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "Their father is a good man, strong, kind, devoted to his children, a man easy to admire." She paused, then added more quietly, "easy to love." Mason's breath caught audibly. "Olivia, you don't need to say anything," she interrupted quickly. "I understand your situation, your priorities. The children must come first always, and I'm not asking for." Her words were cut off as Mason closed the distance between them, his hands coming up to cradle her face with unexpected gentleness. "For weeks now," he said, his voice low and intense, "I've been fighting what I feel for you, telling myself that caring for someone again was too risky, that isolation was safer." Olivia stared up at him, hardly daring to breathe. "And now, today I rode back to this ranch believing I might find you and the children dead," Mason said, his thumbs brushing softly against her cheeks. "And I realized that the true risk would be never telling you what you've come to mean to me. Never showing you." Before Olivia could respond, Mason lowered his head and kissed her. The touch of his lips against hers was tender at first, almost hesitant, as if he feared she might pull away. But when Olivia leaned into him, her hands coming up to rest against his chest, the kiss deepened into something more urgent, more honest, an expression of feelings too complex for words. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Mason rested his forehead against hers. "I love you, Olivia Marshall," he said simply. "I didn't expect to, I didn't want to. But I do." Joy bloomed in Olivia's chest, so intense it was almost painful. "I love you too," she whispered. "I've tried not to, knowing I was only supposed to be here temporarily, but—" "Stay," Mason interrupted, drawing back slightly to look into her eyes. Not just for the summer, stay with us, with me. The offer, so unexpected after weeks of careful distance, left Olivia momentarily speechless. Mason, are you certain? This isn't just gratitude for what happened today. I've known for weeks, Mason admitted. I just couldn't bring myself to acknowledge it. I believed loving someone again meant risking the kind of pain I felt when I lost Sarah. His eyes were solemn as they held hers. But today I learned that never loving again is the greater risk. Never telling you how I feel would have been my deepest regret if something had happened to you. Olivia's heart swelled with emotion, and the twins. Have you considered what this would mean for them? Mason smiled, the expression transforming his face. They already love you. Emma told me weeks ago that you make me smile again. They're wise little souls, those two. They are, Olivia agreed, her own smile breaking through, perceptive enough to see what we were both trying to deny. Mason's arms encircled her waist, drawing her closer. So, Miss Marshall, will you stay? Will you give me, a chance to build something permanent? Olivia looked up at the man before her, this young widower who had hired her reluctantly, who had warned her away from his children, who had gradually and despite himself opened his heart to the possibility of love again. And she knew with absolute certainty what her answer must be. Yes, she said simply, I'll stay. Mason's smile was brilliant as he lowered his head to kiss her again, this time with confidence and promise, sealing their commitment to a future neither had imagined when she first rode up to his ranch just a few months earlier. Outside, the Montana night spread its canopy of stars over the ranch house where two children slept peacefully, unaware that their world had just changed in the most wonderful way possible. Inside, by the warm light of the hearth, a man and woman who had both known loss and loneliness discovered that sometimes the frontier offered not just hardship and isolation, but second chances and new beginnings. For Mason Irwin, who had believed that love was a luxury the harsh realities of frontier life would not permit, and for Olivia Marshall, who had sought only independence and honest work, the future suddenly stretched before them, rich with possibilities neither had dared to dream. Epilogue. Autumn painted the Montana landscape in vibrant hues of gold and crimson as Mason stood on the porch of his ranch house, watching the twins chase fallen leaves across the yard. 6 months had passed since the confrontation with the Blackwell gang, 6 months of profound change and unexpected happiness. They have so much energy, Olivia observed, joining him at the porch rail. I don't know how you managed them alone for so long. Mason smiled, slipping an arm around her waist and drawing her close. Some days better than others, he admitted. But then I don't have to anymore. Olivia leaned into his embrace, her head resting comfortably against his shoulder. The simple gold band on her left hand caught the afternoon sunlight, a tangible symbol of the vows they had exchanged in the Silver Creek Church just 1 month ago, with the twins as their attendants and the entire community as witnesses. Their courtship had progressed swiftly after that night by the fire, yet with a naturalness that belied its speed. Olivia had moved into the main house within weeks, taking the small bedroom off the kitchen, while Mason continued to occupy the master bedroom with the twins, who still occasionally had nightmares about the day the outlaws came. But it wasn't only nightmares that Visit had left in its wake. Garrett Blackwell had been captured by a U.S. Marshal near the Canadian border, finally ending the threat he posed to the territory's isolated ranches. And the shared danger had cemented the bond between Mason and Olivia, between Olivia and the children, in ways that might otherwise have taken years to develop. The ranch had prospered over the summer, the cattle drive bringing a better price than expected and allowing Mason to make improvements to the property that had long been deferred. The vegetable garden Olivia and the twins had planted yielded bountifully, providing food for the present and preserves for the coming winter. Most significant, however, was the transformation in Mason himself. The walls he had built around his heart had crumbled completely, allowing him to embrace not just his love for Olivia but a fuller relationship with his children, who blossomed under the combined attention of a father who laughed more freely and a stepmother whose patience and affection seemed limitless. Sheriff Clark stopped by the south pasture this morning, Mason said, watching as Emma showed Elijah how to make a pile of leaves big enough to jump into. Said he received a letter from your brother. Olivia tensed slightly. Her relationship with her older brother had been strained since their father's death, his attempts to arrange a marriage for her creating the rift that had ultimately led her to Silver Creek and Mason's ranch. "What did it say?" she asked, her voice carefully neutral. "He's coming for a visit," Mason replied, his arm tightening reassuringly around her waist. "Wants to meet his new brother-in-law and see where his sister has settled." Olivia looked up at him, surprise evident in her expression. "Robert is coming here. He's accepted our marriage." Mason nodded. "According to the sheriff, your brother regrets his heavy-handedness. Losing you made him realize he'd overstepped." He brushed a strand of chestnut hair from her face. "Family is precious, Olivia. I'm glad he wants to mend things between you." Tears shimmered in Olivia's green eyes. "I never thought he would. He was so angry when I left." She shook her head slightly. "It seems this ranch has a way of healing broken relationships." "It does now," Mason agreed, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Because of you." A shriek of laughter drew their attention back to the twins, who had constructed a leaf pile taller than Elijah and were now taking turns leaping into it, sending red and gold leaves flying in all directions. "Pa, Miss Olivia," Emma called, using the title she had not quite relinquished despite their marriage. "Come jump with us." Mason exchanged a glance with his wife, a smile tugging at his lips. "What do you say, Mrs. Irwin? Shall we join them?" Olivia's answering smile was radiant. "I thought you'd never ask." Hand in hand, they descended the porch steps and crossed the yard to where the twins waited impatiently, their faces flushed with excitement and the crisp autumn air. As they reached the children, Mason swept Emma into his arms, spinning her around and drawing a peal of delighted laughter from her. Olivia crouched beside Elijah, helping him gather more leaves for their pile. "It needs to be big enough for all of us," she explained, her voice warm with affection. "A family-sized pile." "A family," Elijah repeated thoughtfully, his small face serious as he looked up at Olivia. "That's what we are now, isn't it? A real family." Olivia's heart swelled with emotion as she nodded. "Yes, Elijah, that's exactly what we are." Later, as twilight settled over the ranch and the twins were tucked into their beds, now back in their own room, with Mason and Olivia occupying the master bedroom as husband and wife, Mason found Olivia at the kitchen table, writing in the journal she had kept since childhood. "Happy?" he asked, settling into the chair beside her. Olivia set down her pen, turning to him with a smile that still had the power to quicken his pulse. "More than I ever imagined possible," she said honestly. "Though I'm still getting used to being called Mrs. Irwin instead of Miss Marshall." "It suits you," Mason said, taking her hand in his. "Though I fell in love with both women, the capable ranch hand who could outride most men, and the gentle caretaker who taught my daughter to braid her hair and my son to appreciate stories." Olivia's fingers tightened around his. "And I fell in love with the man who was brave enough to open his heart again, despite having known such loss." Her expression grew thoughtful. "Do you remember what you said when I first arrived? That I was only here for your twins." Mason winced slightly at the memory. "Not my finest moment. I was determined to keep you at a distance, convinced you had ulterior motives." "And now?" Olivia asked, a teasing light in her eyes. "Now I know you're here for all of us," Mason said softly. "For the twins, for me, for the family we've become together." He hesitated, then added, "and perhaps, someday, for the family we might grow to be." Understanding dawned in Olivia's eyes, her cheeks flushing with pleased color. "Mason Irwin, are you suggesting what I think you're suggesting?" Mason smiled, lifting her hand to press a kiss to her palm. "The twins have mentioned more than once how nice it would be to have a little brother or sister." "Have they indeed?" Olivia's voice was warm with amusement and something deeper, hope perhaps. "And what does their father think of this idea?" "Their father," Mason said, drawing her closer, "thinks that love has room to grow, that families can expand, and that nothing would make him happier than to see you holding our child in your arms." Tears glistened in Olivia's eyes as she leaned forward to kiss him, a soft, tender meeting of lips that conveyed more than words ever could. "I would like that too," she whispered against his mouth, "very much." As the fire crackled in the hearth and night settled fully over the Montana landscape, Mason held his wife close, marveling at the journey that had brought them to this moment. From reluctant employer to loving husband, from grief-stricken widower to man reborn through love, he had traveled a path he never expected when he placed that advertisement for ranch help in the Silver Creek Gazette. And Olivia, who had arrived seeking only independence and honest work, had found instead a home, a family, and a love that had transformed her life as completely as it had transformed his. Outside, the wind whispered through the autumn leaves, carrying the first hints of the winter to come. But within the walls of the ranch house, warmth and love created a sanctuary against whatever hardships the frontier might bring, a testament to the healing power of open hearts and second chances, and to the family that had grown from the most unexpected of beginnings. For Mason Irwin, who had once believed that the frontier was no place for love, and for Olivia Marshall Irwin, who had sought her own path against convention, the future stretched before them bright with promise and possibility, a future they would build together day by day, season by season, love by love.